Azuela Podcast Syndicate Production. Samut-Sari Conversation with Mimi, to connect with other women who may need someone to talk to around everyday's life issues and challenges, from managing career and household to inner productivity, relationships, and other hot topics. Samut-Sari Conversation with Mimi.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to Samut-Sari Conversations with Mimi. This is your host, Mimi Laurelia, and you are in a podcast where we feature hot topics and topics of interest to both men and women alike. We also feature guests who share their passion and their commitment to their profession or talents. Here at Samut-Sari, we share stories to inspire you, stories from ordinary people who make extraordinary things. And today, I'm very, very lucky to have an expert with me. I will consider this person an expert because the topic that we will be talking about is seemingly technical, but we'll try to break it down for you so you will understand what this concept is and how you can probably apply it in your everyday life. And if you know of people who may need this kind of support, our expert will advise us on who can benefit from this program. But first, I would like to introduce to you Dr. Gilbert Azuela. Dr. Azuela is passionate about the use of sensory-based interventions to assist people in managing a lot of their different aspects of their life. It could be mental distress. It could be anything else that has to do with his field, which is clinical sciences. So his research interest also includes outcome evaluation, talking and doing therapies. Maybe I'll ask him more about that later. He finished his PhD from the Auckland University of Technology in New Zealand, and he also has a bachelor's and master's degree background in occupational therapy. So I welcome Dr. Gilbert Azuela in my show. Hi, Gilbert.
Oh, thank you so much, Mimi. And first of all, would like to say a big thanks for inviting me to talk about the topic that I'm really passionate.
Yeah. So Gilbert, I don't know a lot of people who have this area of expertise as you. So I feel more lucky to have you spending a bit of time with me to explain this to our viewers. So our viewers are all over the globe. So it could be good morning, good afternoon, good evening to wherever they are. And some of them are listening via podcast. Some of them are listening via YouTube. So I call them viewers, audience, listeners. I kind of mix and match them. And my goal about inviting you today is to speak about your work because it is aligned with mental health, addiction, disability, and many other areas. And my goal is to get the layperson to understand exactly the work that you do and to gain more understanding about this particular framework that you are espousing or that you advocate for and how it could potentially help them in their daily lives. But first, can you tell the audience a little bit about yourself, your background as an occupational therapist? What does an occupational therapist do? And why did you get interested in this area in the first place?
Okay. Oh, thanks, Mimi. Well, I'm an occupational therapist trained. I'm originally trained in the Philippines where I studied OT. Well, actually, I'm an occupational therapist by accident. So I didn't know occupational therapy at that time, so 20 years ago. So it just by an accident. My intention at that time was to take a physical therapy. But during that time, there was no space for additional student to be for physical therapy. So I ended up as an occupational therapy on that college. And then later on, I started to like it, the profession. And from then on, I never leave occupational therapy. So just a little bit of background about how I end up to be an occupational therapist. So just for the benefit of people listening to us or viewing us, occupational therapy is a branch of science wherein we help people to engage to meaningful activities, things that they enjoy. For example, some people might have problems with their mental health or their physical health or some physical issues, disability or impairments. Occupational therapy help them to engage to those meaningful activities despite of difficulties.
Mm-hmm.
So, so in a nutshell, really, we kind of help and support people to achieve their maximum potential. It's very broad and it's quite varied because there's so many practices in that field. It can
Yeah.
be in pediatrics, it could be in adult physical dysfunction, and my area is in mental health.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
mental health is the area that I spent most of my years. So I've been practicing now for almost 20 years.
Wow.
And then I moved to New Zealand in beginning or mid of 2006. And then luckily I landed a job that I really like.
Yeah.
And then from then on, I carry on working and specializing in helping people to manage their distress and agitation
Yeah.
when people are feeling anxious. So I I help them, in
Yeah.
a very supportive way. And one of the approaches that I use is the use of different sensory-based approaches. Okay, so
Yes.
later on we will talk about, I know you have some few questions about sensory-based interventions, and I'll try to put it in a layman's terms so general people would understand it because there's so
Yes.
many technical terminologies that we use. But at the end of the day, there's no point of using those technical terminologies if people won't be able to appreciate it and apply
Mm.
it in life scenario.
Yes, that's good. So I didn't really realize the extent of the field of work in relation to mental health until I moved here to Australia because the mental health is always at the forefront of you know services that are available to members of the community. So let's kind of jump straight into sensory-based intervention because it has something to do.
Like what you hear so far? Make sure you never miss a show by clicking the subscribe button now. This podcast is made possible by listeners like you. Thank you for your support. Now, back to the show.
With mental health. Exactly, Gilbert. What is this sensory-based intervention, and is it a simple thing to do? Is it a difficult thing to do? Is this a program, or is this just a philosophy? So, can you really tease it out for us?
Okay, so basically when we use, when I deliver sensory-based approaches, we talk about the different senses of people. Okay. So often we know the five basic senses. So the sense of touch, the sense of sight, the sense
Mm-hmm.
of smell, the sense of taste, and the sense of hearing. Okay, so those are the five basic senses. And we also have additional senses that often that we don't realize. And that
Mm-hmm.
sense is the balance sense. So wherein it gives us ability to move around, to walk
Right.
or to do activity. So our balances is inside it's located in the ear. Mhm. And that helps us to move around, to move around against the gravity. And the other one is the position sense of the body. Okay, so that's another thing. So whenever we move our hands or as we bend our knees or bend our elbows, we'll be able to tell that those extremities or those parts of the body are moving. So it gives
Mm.
us an intel. Okay,
Yeah.
so those basically are the seven senses, and we use those different senses in order for us to identify what is happening outside our environment. And often because it's we already knew it from since the beginning, the
Mm-hmm.
moment we are born, you know those different senses are existing. But as we grow, we tend to be unconscious about the ability or the importance of those senses in order for us to understand what's happening in our environment. Mhm.
Right.
And by maximizing or utilizing those senses, it will help us to manage how we feel, how we react, mhm, and how we respond to those different things happening around us.
Mm-hmm. So, Gilbert, this might be a stupid question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. So,
It's okay.
method, why was this method developed in the first place? Do we have a sensory disorder or a sensory problem that needs to be solved through intervention? That's why it's called sensory intervention. And can you give us an example of what those sort of disorders are? Is it because when you talk about mental health, it's so general, but if it's not mental health, what other kind of
Yeah,
disorders will it help address?
correct. Yeah. Well, if we talk about sensory processing, every individual or every human being, we process sensory input. Okay. So everyone has the ability to process that.
Mm-hmm.
But not everyone can be able to has the same capacity or capability to modulate or regulate those sensory input. Mhm. Let's say, for example, uh, people are quite individual. Mhm. They're quite unique.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone has their own preference.
Yeah.
To talk it really in layman's term, Mimi, let's say, for example, you yourself, you have your own preference of food. You have
Mm.
your own preference of, so when we talk about food, that refers to taste.
Yes.
We have our own preference of scent. So that's the smell. And we have our own preference of pictures or visual, that's the eyesight. And we have own preference of music.
Mm-hmm.
Different people have different types of music. Okay. And when we move around, as we move around, right, we use our body, we have different preference as well. Some people move fast, some people move, a bit slowly.
Yep.
Mhm. So those are the things that tells us that every individual have their own preference. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So let's say, for example, if you have a if you choose a particular item, let's say, for example, I'll ask you, Mimi, uh, among those senses that I mentioned, which is your favorite? Let's
Oh,
say the
it's
taste,
hard to say.
the smell.
It's hard to say. Oh, but definitely, for example, I'm struggling at the moment to control my eating. So I think we'll focus on my sense of taste. That I'm leaning towards heightened, intake of food. So that maybe is a focus of my physical. I don't know what do you call that. My cravings is more to eat. So it's my taste.
Okay, so maybe you have preference on taste, and then when you eat, okay, when you try food, what are you know, how do you feel? What's your experience?
See,
No?
that's the funny thing about food is I really like eating, especially now that I can cook the type of food that I really want to eat. So it's hard to control the portion of the food that I eat. And I tend to like overeat now. So I feel happy when I eat. And that's the reason why I'm struggling a little bit to diet and exercise because of the satisfaction that I get from eating food. But at the same time, it makes me think that I don't need to exercise because I'm already full and happy.
Yeah,
So that's what I'm feeling at the
it's a bit,
moment.
yeah, it's a bit complicated and tricky, really, when you talk about the food intake. But if we're
Yes.
going to focus on about our experience when we tried the food that we like, It gives happiness, you know,
Mm-hmm.
and like what your experience said, that you feel happy, you feel, and when you're happy, you're relaxed.
Yeah.
And sometimes it could be a comfort thing for us to do. People tend to do tend to eat more if they
Mm-hmm.
want to relax, because it's a sensory thing when we eat. Mhm. It's a combination of the taste, and then we smell it, and there's also
Yes.
a movement. So
Yeah.
all those sensory experience, it creates a very calming effect to people. They make them feel relaxed, they make them feel comfortable. Mhm. uh, and that's the thing, if people wants to do that more often, sometimes it leads to a some not so good thing, you know. If
So
you
self-regulation is
uh, yeah,
important.
yes, it's self-regulation, yeah, but it's a
Yeah.
matter of identifying really a sense type of sensory item or sensory activity that will make you feel happy or has a positive effect to you.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay.
So yeah, uh, one common example is, music. Mhm. Music is quite cultural. Different people have different preference in music.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, we know that music impacts the muscle tone. When you are feeling tense, when you're starting to feel tense, calming music helps a lot. Mhm. We know by evidence and by science that music impacts the muscle tone. One
Mm-hmm.
classic example of this is, you know, some people go to the gym. What you would notice in the gym, when do you do exercise, there's a background music, all those upbeat music, so to stimulate the mood and also to impact the muscle. So that effect has more on activation. It
Mm-hmm.
gives, uh, to encourage the people to move around.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
that's one example. And you would notice as well, when you go to a spa, mhm, they're
Oh,
using
yes.
calming music to
Yeah.
relax, because
Mm-hmm.
that has an impact on your muscle tone. It depends on the type of music. They're calming and they're also alerting music.
Ah, okay. So maybe
Hmm.
subliminally we don't know these things, but there's a scientific reason or backing behind those background music in different contexts or scenarios. So Gilbert, let me jump into another question. Is this a type of program where or intervention where you need to regularly be in contact with a therapist or an expert like you, or is this something that people can manage and do on their own? For example, okay, here's your plan, here's what you need to do, now off you go. Or is this like a series of sessions or a series of steps or lessons or modules that one has to go through in order to achieve whatever it is that they need to achieve or whatever specific goals that they have?
Yeah, occupational therapist is the known expert in identifying sensory strategies. So if people have uh, difficulty managing their emotions, or they want to learn strategies to calm themselves or to alert their senses, uh, one way to one way of support is seeking for an occupational therapist. They can help occupational therapists who practice in that field.
Yeah.
Mhm. Um, I have this conversation with some people that, sensory approaches, it's very natural. For people with condition or have an illness.
Mhm.
Um, they may need professional support, to identify those sensory strategies, mhm, or what their preferences. But for the general population, it can be identified and you can explore it on your own.
Right.
It's
So
just
that
more.
So this sensory intervention is not like a fixed program. It depends on how long it would probably take in order to support a certain individual. It's not like cookie cutter, okay, when you finish, it's done. It's like physical therapy na it's different from one person to another. Sometimes it's a short session or maybe one or two or three, and for some other people, it can be a year long or a lifelong pain management regime. Is that sort of thing that we do for sensory based intervention?
Yeah, it's very individualized. Some people can identify immediately, but as we discover ourselves, we discover different tools,
Mm.
different strategies that can help us. uh yeah, like I said, it's very individualized, and there's no specific treatment plan for an
Okay.
individual. It
Yeah.
should be as a person itself. So you put that person at the center,
Mm-hmm.
identifying what are the sensory based intervention that would help that person.
Okay. So, Gilbert, at the moment, we all know, and everybody in the whole world is suffering in one way or another with the effects of COVID. It could be a simple case of anxiety, or it could be heightened fear of
Mm,
a lot of different things. It could be getting sick because of COVID, the financial impact, the loneliness because you have been constrained and restrained, you couldn't get out, or maybe the fear of not living tomorrow because of many other things. Is this something that we can use to help us a little bit? Like, is there a practical application to what is happening to us at the moment?
oh yeah, people, especially this time of pandemic, we stay, we experience the lockdown. There's so many worries that we think, and there's so many uncertainties, and all these things impacts our mental health. We feel stress about it.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's become uncontrollable, or
Mm,
from mild to moderate to becoming a bit toxic stress that it's not quite good to our mental health and physical
yes.
health. Mhm. So for this one, there's so many activities that they could try.
Like what you hear so far? Make sure you never miss a show by clicking the subscribe button now.
Mhm. The thing is trying the general principles of using sensory activities. So by identifying or trying different sensory activities, things that they need to remember that when doing a sensory activities, it has two effect, whether it will make them calm or it will make them alert. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So when I said a calming effect, a sensory activities that has a calming effect, these are helpful when people are feeling restless or overwhelmed, or where they're starting to get agitated. So, and then when I said about alerting effect, so these are helpful to people to, if they have a low energy, being
Mm-hmm.
flat or tired,
Yeah.
so they need that alerting type of sensory activities. So strategies that we could do is, they really need just to explore what they can identify within their environment. I can talk about one example of uh, calming and alerting sensation.
Yes.
Often is the, let's say for example, the sense of touch. Okay. um, some people generally, they would really appreciate a warm bath,
Mm,
to improve relaxation and calmness. Let's say after a long day, a warm bath or a warm shower, that would give a really good calming effect to people. In contrast, in general principle, to improve that attention and energy, a cold water or a cold shower can give that effect. Mhm. So
Mm.
those simple things that they could do or could trial within their environment, because warm bath and cold, or warm shower and cold shower, is readily available in our, in our home. Mhm.
Yeah. That's
Yeah.
good. So we don't realize that some of these practical things make a huge difference in the way we manage our emotions and our general well-being, including our mental health. So Gilbert, is this only available where you are? Is this method something something that people can access outside of New Zealand? Because you are in New Zealand. So how do people who are interested in learning more about this and maybe applying it in their life at the moment, if they feel a bit imbalanced or a bit anxious, how can you advise them on how to access this information and resources?
Sure, yeah. Um, I'm a person resource, so they can contact me. Hmm. I'm happy to be contacted who's ever interested about to learn about this sensory-based intervention. So happy to share um, my details is there.
Yep.
I'm publicly available through Facebook and Instagram and Twitter,
Mm-hmm.
uh, under my name. Mhm.
Yeah, you definitely.
So
When
I
you Google Gilbert, for the benefit of the audience, if you Google Gilbert, he will be the first in your SEO in in the field of sensory based intervention. So I'm pretty sure they will not miss that. And it's good that you're making yourself available. Like I said, I'm very lucky that you are able to talk to me because I think people need to take more accountability to their general health and well-being. I think the normal reaction of people, as you know, the flight and fright, is that correct? The flight and fright
Yeah,
response, we kind of tend to like keep it to ourselves sometimes, thinking that we're strong enough, or we probably don't think there's a problem, but there is, but we're not open enough to acknowledge it and act upon it to help ourselves. So I think what you're trying to explain to us today, and me personally, I'm beginning to realize that indeed we have to look after ourselves, and even the simple things that you mentioned is already a lot of help. Don't you agree?
yeah, I agree, because if we look in our culture, Mimi, the Filipino culture, we're
Mm,
still not quite open about our own mental health to talk about it in public. Way back in the Philippines, are still uh, we're still on the process of being about this practice of being open about our own mental health.
that's
And
right.
even and people back home, they have a different connotation or different thinking when we talk about mental health. But
Yeah.
mental health really is just, it's mental health. It's similar with physical health. uh, there's still a stigma about it. But if people are starting to talk about it and be open about it, it would be easy to to provide that support if needed as early. It start with a minimal stress, and then it will build and build. It will impact. You know, like I said, um, do it. Act proactively.
Yes,
And
that's
act
nice. Act
early. Yeah,
proactively. Yes, I agree.
and
Totally,
early,
totally. That's why I
early.
really want to spread the word about this sensory-based intervention, because I believe that it should be something people take advantage of, whether or not they are aware that it is already there with them, within them. They just need a little bit of help and guidance to, implement those strategies. And you are one person who can definitely do that. And Gilbert, we're almost running out of time, but I want you to close the program by giving your final message, or any advice to our listeners, viewers, about the programs, or any other general tips that you can provide regarding mental health, and obviously about sensory-based intervention itself.
Yeah. Well, for people listening to your podcast, Maria, I really like for my words of my the words that I'd like to share is for us to maximize about our own senses. And don't forget those different senses that we have. Those are those are the tool that already existed in our body. It's
Yes.
just a matter of knowing what our preferences and what could help us. Sometimes we tend to forget things that are too obvious, and we look because of too busy. It's things are getting complicated. We forget the simplicity of life.
That's
And
right.
those basic calming, relaxing, and alerting activities can be found within our own environment, within reach. It's just by learning about our own senses.
Mm. And
Yeah.
even talking to you is already giving me a calming effect.
Thanks, Amy.
If you become a guest in my house for a week, I think life will be so much easier and life would be so much smoother. Because my kids always tell me, Mom, you're always highly strung. When can you just really calm down, de stress, and relax, chillax, which
Yes,
is
and there's
a
so many.
vocabulary.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so
yeah.
many strategies to calm our senses, and it has a good effect not only for you as a person but also to the people around you. Mhm.
Yes. Wow, Gilbert. I think with the little time that we have today talking about your work and talking about this very enlightening concept, and lucky that I attended your first webinar. Otherwise, I would not have realized what this is all about. So this is like a follow-up learning opportunity for me. And I'm a lifelong learner. I always want to learn new things and learn from other people. And it keeps me really on my toes. And I think I will try to read more about it and discover those calming strategies that I can implement for myself. So I really, really want to thank you for your time today, Gilbert. And it's really my deep gratitude to you. And I really encourage the listeners in our program, in our podcast, to consider everything that Gilbert has shared with us. And again, his details are available in Instagram and Facebook, and he's even on LinkedIn. So there's no mistaking his availability. Again, thank you, Gilbert. So I'll end the show now. This is Mimi Laurelia saying that if you have stories or topics you wish to feature in our show, please email me at mimi@dinosocial.com. Sakutsari is a member of the Gorilla Podcast Syndicate, and you can reach out to me as well if you want to get in touch with Gilbert. And thank you. Don't forget to like, subscribe to our channel. Gilbert, we'll wave goodbye to our viewers and listeners. Thank you very much for being with me, and I hope that you can come back another time to continue our conversation.
I will. Yeah, I'm open to that, Mimi. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Gilbert. Bye bye.
Okay. Bye bye. Cheers.
If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe so you're notified when a new episode is posted in Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or via RSS. While you're at it, if you found value in this show, rate and review this podcast and share it with your friends. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us. And if you want to know more, check out www.guerrillapodcast.com.au or guerrillapodcast.com.ph. A Guerrilla Podcast Syndicate production.